Hey friends, I wanted to do a video, well, here's the backstory. I was not expecting, I don't even know how to start. So, the Victorian Romantic Tarot most recent edition has come out, and I pre-ordered it out of a moment of feeling like, oh, what if I decide I want this one day and it's already sold out? Because that's the story with Baba Studio decks, right? Is they come out and they go pretty quick, and then they may or may not get reprinted, and it seems so far like this is sort of the last iteration of the Victorian Romantic deck. So, but I didn't want to do, I just was, I guess my expectations for it were that I would think it was pretty and then not use it and either have it in the collection or one day sell it and pay off my student loans. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't have really high expectations for it. But when I got it and I opened it, I was actually astonished by how much I liked it. And I mean, I've seen walkthroughs of it. It's not like I didn't know what I was getting into, and it's just like it wasn't. It's not my style necessarily per se, but I did it anyway, and maybe because my expectations for it were so low, I was sort of blown away by it when I walked through it for the first time. But so I wanted to chat about that in a video, but I didn't want to do a walkthrough of it because there are so many. One of the things that caught me, though, initially was the way that it seemed to be the antithesis or the inverse of the Bohemian Gothic, which I've had for a long time. So I thought, what better way to sort of put it into use, because these decks seem to be so connected in such a, light and shadow way, than to explore doing a light and shadow reading with them. And one of the things I like to do, well, I rarely use more than one deck in a reading. I honestly don't think I have any readings that I do for folks where I use more than one different deck, because I think a deck usually gives me everything I need. But I just thought it would be interesting to experiment with the cards in that way. And then, so what I thought I would do is start with a reading about sort of where's something hidden and dark impacting life, right? And then explore where light could be shed on that and how to reconcile it. And so I thought I would use 3 decks for that. So I knew I would use these for sort of the light and shadow, but then I thought, well, I need something neutral for the reconciliation, and what's kind of the ultimate neutral deck. And I thought about a bunch in my collection, but I thought, oh, hello, it's a Marseille deck, right? Because it has nearly no, what's what I'm looking for? It has nearly no point of view, so to speak. So that's what I thought I would do, and just sort of make a video of it and share it and just use it as a way of chatting about some stuff and talking about these decks without actually doing a walkthrough of them and whatnot. So, by the way, the color on this box, this like peacock blue, is amazing. I think it's really breathtaking. All right, so here's that deck. Let me move these boxes over to the desk. These are so complementary, these two, in such a weird way. I mean, they really do sort of, they're clearly similar cardstock, and they're clearly made by the same publisher, and they have a very cool quality. So, and then this is the Millennium Edition Marseille. So, how should I do this without making a mess? Well, I'm going to start with the shadow cards to start with, and let me just talk a little bit about what I mean by that. In the shadow cards in this deck, what I'm focusing on, in essence, is sort of the unconscious, is the underneath. So what I'm going to think about in terms of shadow is what's something that's at work below the surface that we're not really aware of, that is at play and maybe impacting us negatively, but that because we haven't shed light on it, we can't really see it. So that's what I mean by shadow. So let me just start with that, since it's fresh on my mind. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do sort of a spread in the sense of like each row of 3 will represent the thing that I just said it did. So this will represent the shadow. I'll draw 3 cards, which I usually do if I'm using a spread. I don't use one position to represent one card to represent one position, I traditionally use 3 cards to do that, especially with decks in the Rider-Waite-Smith tradition where I do not use reversals. But by and large, I like to use 3 cards to represent one position. So this is, again, the unconscious thing, the thing at play that's really having a negative impact. But that we're not aware of. Can we see it? Pretty well, actually. All right, I'm going to move this over to the side again so I don't make a mess. So these 3 cards represent the subconscious, the thing that's at work impacting us in a potentially negative or harmful way, but that we're not really aware of, we're not really thinking of, or that we don't give credence to. And in this case, it's 2 major arcanas. We have Strength, the Emperor, and then the 8 of Wands, which is interesting. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use light to explore how to draw that out, how to explore it, how to make sense of it, and how to make it into something positive, in essence. So to sort of bring the light out of it. So for that, I'm going to use, of course, the Victorian Romantic. These decks shuffle. Oh my god! Like anyone who reviews these decks always talks about that, but there's really something magic about this cardstock. So I'm going to put these down here just so I can shuffle the next deck, but these will actually go below. All right, let's get those out of the way. And then how do we, whoops, oh my god, how do we reconcile them? And I will make this easier to see once I have them laid out. How do we reconcile this? How do we connect them? How do we make this make sense, right? So how do we sort of bridge the gap between the light and the shadow? This deck does not bridge shuffle all that well. It's really thick. The cardstock is really good, but it does not bridge shuffle because it's really like a big stack. It's actually hard to kind of grab it with my hands. sexy. It's also, oh my god, it's also really difficult to do around a tripod, as anyone who makes videos will tell you. Since this is a real reading, I'm actually trying to shuffle it fairly accurately. By the way, I don't really use pop-out cards because, particularly with decks like this, if they are hard to shuffle, it's inevitable. And particularly in videos where I'm inevitably shoving around a tripod, it's going to happen. So it's not so much the deck telling you something as it is sloppy shuffling. All right. So let me move these the way that I want them. Let me make sure we can see them all. It's not going to be easy. That is the one thing about shooting these things on my phone, is that it's hard to get everything in there. And my tripod's pretty low. But we'll do our best. Okay, so again, we're talking about light and shadow here and reconciling them. So the first row at the top represents something that's active, that's subconscious, that's sort of impacting us in a negative way, but that we haven't brought to the surface yet. The bottom row, the light row, represents how to bring it to the surface, how to shed light on it and explore it. And then the middle row represents how to reconcile them, how to sort of make progress with them. And to a degree, something that I like to do in a lot of readings these days is a measure of checking your progress as well, because I think that that's a really helpful thing. So in the top row, in the shadow row, we've got a little interesting combo here of Strength, the Eight of Wands, and the Emperor. And I love this combo because these are not negative cards. The Emperor can sometimes have negative connotations, to be sure, but Strength and the Eight of Wands generally are really great, you know, in a really positive sense. If you were to read this in just a really traditional way out of context, you know, you have a real strong, powerful will to get things out into the world, to make progress in your work, and to really take charge of your career without forcing it, you know what I mean? So you can sort of be the leader, you can be the powerful person who gets things out without being a dictator, without, you know, that combination of Strength and the Emperor is a really nice balance because you have power there, you have leadership, you have authority, but the Strength card for me in its light aspect is generally about doing things without forcing it. It's about exercising a gentle will. It's about diplomacy and getting where you need to go without force, you know, which is the Marseille title for that card, right? But again, we're looking at something that's impacting us negatively, and we're looking at these cards in shadow. And this is an interesting exploration of that idea because I believe, and I talk about this a lot, that all cards have both. So we have three, I would say two traditionally positive cards and one traditionally sort of neutral card. The Emperor really depends on the cards around it to tell you what context he's exhibiting his powers in. But in this case, he's surrounded by really positive, or he's preceded by really positive cards traditionally. So in a normal reading or a traditional reading or out of this context, I would read him in a more positive way. Now, what we have to do as readers is answer the question, which is, what is at work? What am I not seeing? What am I not engaging with? What's really impacting me subconsciously at a negative level? So I have to read these cards in their shadow aspect. And so the strength card to me in a shadow is exhibiting, it's trying to force what doesn't want to be forced. It's trying to push what doesn't want to be pushed. It's exhibiting dominance over. It's trying to control what can't be controlled. Likewise, the emperor, the emperor is very easy to think about in a negative or shadow aspect because he's domineering. He's a control freak, you know what I mean? He can be belligerent. And the Eight of Wands, to me, in a shadow aspect, if we think about the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith image of like things sort of shooting out, of work going out, to me fire has to do with projects and effort, work, things that we're passionate about. It can indicate sort of a lot of sexual partners too. But even in the Marseille tradition, where I tend to read a lot, or in the numerological system that I use for that, 8 is an effort. It's a hard effort. So in essence, like what's really down deep at the surface, I would say, and in terms of a subconscious negative thing that's really impacting you in a negative way, is you're burning yourself out in this effort to gain power over what you cannot have power over it. And so subconsciously, you may even know that, but you are absolutely, absolutely having an impossible time of dealing with the fact that you have to work under conditions under which you have very little control. You are not the boss. You are not the powerful one. You are not the strong one. And you're burning yourself out. That effort you're putting into getting control over this is doing a real damage deep down in your soul. It's impacting you in ways deeper and darker than you really thought it was possible for that to happen. In fact, it may be sort of getting to the core of your personhood. You believe, for example, that you are, in essence, an autonomous being, that you have will, that you can control things that are controllable. And right now, so much is out of your control, and it's really killing you in a way, to not have that be the case. And it's causing your energy to be diffuse. It's causing you to get fired up about things that don't matter. I would also look at this in terms of its structure too, because the Eight of Wands flanked by these two cards, if I look at the Eight of Wands as the central point, there's a real pull between the two. And while the character here is sort of looking at the Eight of Wands, the lion, the sort of dominant figures in these two cards, are facing away. And there's a pull, and there's this like tug of war. And so whatever energy you have is being depleted by an effort to exhibit strength and an effort to exhibit dominance. And those are two different things. And in fact, your strength is being weakened and your dominance is being diminished by the fact that your energy is being pulled in different directions. So, the interesting thing about shadow to me, and reading for the person I'm reading for, is this idea that they likely know this, but what they don't know, if we think about this in shadow, is how deep it goes, how dark it goes, and how much it's impacting their lives. What a real, truly dark impact it's having on their well-being in general. So now what we do is we come down here, and let me move just a touch to see the bottom row here. And so what we're looking at is, how do we bring it to light? How do we work with it? How do we explore it? How do we see it? And I'm thinking of light very literally in this case, of bringing what's dark into what's visible so that we can explore it and look at it. In a sense, it's almost like shining a light on it, but also objectifying it, so that we see now what we're going to do. And now we're going to step back and look at it as a scientist, as an observer, as someone who's not suffering through it, right? So in this row, we have the Star, the Three of Cups, and the Four of Cups. And again, a really interesting combo. The images in this row to me are a little less interesting than their inherent meanings from my point of view. So again, what I did here was I talked through my traditional sense of these cards, and then I engaged it in the context of the position in the spread. I'm going to do the same thing here, because that helps me sort of make my way through where I'm wanting to go. Now, in this case, I'm reading the cards in their light position. So we have a neutral card for me in the Star. I tend to read the Star more as direction, stealing a little bit from Lenormand, than the traditional idea of hope, which to me is kind of vague. The Three of Cups is traditionally positive, and the Four of Cups has a negative quality to it traditionally, but in this case, I'm reading it for its light. I'm reading it for where it's positive. So I'm going to explore it that way. So again, I mentioned this star traditionally suggests to me a sense of direction, of looking where you're going, of knowing where you're going, of having a guide, of having a pole star. The Three of Cups in its traditional meaning to me, in the way I'm using the word traditional a lot, in the sense that I read the Three of Cups often using a numerology as sort of emotion as water, the things that feed us, the things that nurture us, the things we care about, that are our relationships, that cause us to feel what we do, that are our feelings, etc. And three, of course, is growing. It's the first manifestation of something. It's the two becoming one. So it's the product, the production of something that came before it. And then the Four of Cups is stability. So stabilizing those things once the initial generation. So three is like the generation. It's the birth of something. It's where one and two come together and produce something. It's the result of an action. Four stabilizes after that. So that's just sort of the traditional meaning. Now what I have to do is work at it in context and then have it respond to these cards. So this again is the light. It's how do I bring this out and explore it, work with it, and see it, observe it in the light. And it's it's not always easy to make these connections, and this is one thing I think that as a reader, I often start to sweat when I start to feel like, oh shit, like I'm not making a connection. But I also feel like one of the reasons I make videos is in the case that someone who's new comes along and sees the video and thinks it's always easy, and one thing I think as people who have experience can do is like say, hey, like this isn't making a whole lot of sense to me right now. I need to work through this, and that's where I'm at. You know what I mean? One of the things that happens when I watch other people read is I'm like, oh my god, it seems so effortless, and even after the number of years I've been doing it, I still sort of feel like often readings are like, oh my god, I can't do this anymore. So sometimes they're effortless and sometimes they're not. This was a pretty easy row. This one's a little harder, especially in the context of responding to this. It's because it's not just these cards' individual meaning. It's taking these three cards, drawing it out in the context of what they represent, and having them respond to these. So there's a dialogue. So these cards don't get to be anymore what they seem like they are. They have to respond to the context, which is always really important to me. So if I were to read this row just as a traditional row out of context, I would say something like, your sense of direction right now involves moving more towards the emotional, caring for the emotional, right? And in fact, in the imagery, she's looking in this direction. So that's helpful to see. Expanding your well-being, your well-being is your sense of emotion here, your community, if we look at the images, and then using that to stabilize where you are. So that starts to get me a good response here. You know what I mean? I start to feel like, okay, I'm seeing this in response. What I'm seeing is you have to set a course to healing, and that healing is not a solitary act. You're solitary here, but in here, your community is growing. The emotion is growing. The feeling is growing. So if we take the party in this scene and the party in that scene, it feels like one of the ways to deal with this, to bring this out into light, is to engage with others on it, is to talk about it, to set a course for yourself where you're working through it with other people who understand what you're doing. That's one way. The other way is to think in terms of like the baby steps of growth, right? So you start out recognizing that everything is solvable. If I look at the star in a more hopeful way, if I think about it in terms of peace and quiet, of meditation, even of the moment of rest, of just sort of dusk and the relaxation that comes with that, of the hope that comes in sort of a cleansing night, that you do move forward, you do grow, and because of that, you do start to feel an emotional foundation. But all of this feels very, very sort of vague to me, and it feels really smooshy and not super helpful. When we're dealing with something, when we come for a reading, I feel, and This is an interesting video to make, I'm realizing, because I'm partly doing a reading for someone, and I'm partly explaining how I get where I go, and I'm partly explaining my thoughts on tarot in general. So it's like there's so many branches to this video, it's probably going to make your head spin, if you've even gotten this far in it. And if you haven't, then who cares? All of what I just said about this row of cards is nebulous. And by that I mean it's not super helpful, it's vague, and it's very... I hate the word very. It's just, it's too vague to be practical. You know, it's too vague to be useful. And I think a lot of times we get a reading, we're like, oh yeah, that sounds really good. Like, I need to engage my community. But, you know, like, to do what? You know what I mean? To get where? Like, what am I looking for? And how do I know where I'm going? And how do I know I'm doing that? Like, what's the actual step I take? And that's, for me as a reader, something that I really feel like we need to mine for. So I got my initial sense here, and if I go back to my original interpretation of this row, it's setting a course for engaging with your community to stabilize this. That, you know, that's decent advice. You have friends, you want to go in there and talk through it with them. But in response to this shadow and the real energy burnout that's happening here, the real pull, the real kind of dark stuff, how does my community help me do that? That's partly what this row is for, and that's partly where I want to challenge myself as a reader to see if I can mine anything out of this row, you know? So I've got a sense, but I want to sort of see if I can dig deeper and really get the answer to the question I asked, which was, how do I bring this to light? How do I work with it? How do I observe it at a distance? And so my job now is to kind of look at what these cards say to me as a story and make a practical response to it. And so what I would say in this case is I need to commit or set my course to talking about this with others and in a sense having them reflect it back to me. You know, if the question is, how do I shed light on it? How do I show this to myself in a way that I can really see it? I need to commit to going out to the people I trust and having them stabilize where I am by showing me. And the showing me is just, what would I do with friends? Like, the show it to me, reflect it back to me, doesn't come from the cards. It comes from, like, how can my friends stabilize the situation for me? And then I step away from the cards and I ask myself that question. I'm like, well, they can reflect it back to me. You know, they can tell me what they see. So one of the weird things about life is that our friends and family often see things about ourselves that we don't, because we are too in the thick of it. So going out into the world and asking our friends to show us who we are and to say, how has this been manifesting? Because that's the ultimate question, right? Is shedding light and observing on this. So I go to my friends and I say, how have I changed? How am I manifesting this? You know, how am I different now than I was before this started coming into play? Have you noticed anything? And I can dig deeper into the meaning of the cards too. Am I still a party animal, or am I kind of apathetic? If I think of the traditional meaning of this card for Rider-Waite-Smith system, if I just look at that, there's always a traditional apathy with that. So show me who I am. Am I still who I was, or am I turned into sort of a blah, apathetic person who can't see the gifts in my life? You know, so there's a degree to which the cards prompt the question. The cards prompt me to start thinking and digging deeper, and then they make me think, okay, well, what does that mean in real life? You know, so that's where I get to have my friends show me, like, if I'm going out, I'm repeating myself, if I'm going out into the world engaging with them, what do? They're going to show me, they're going to tell me. Or again, you could look at this at a very surface place and they could entertain me, they could distract me. But remember, our job is to answer the question of the position, and the position was, how do I shed light on it? How do I observe it? You know, how do I see how this is impacting me? So I have to dig for that answer, and going out and partying and distracting is not the answer to that question. Do you know what I mean? Every reader is going to come up with a different answer to that question, but I think as a reader, we need to go there. We need to mine for the real answer. So now we get to the third row. And the third row, as I said, is how I reconcile these two. So now that my friends do this for me, for example, how do I go out there and do the work? And in a sense, how do I check my progress? So here's sort of like how I start to solve this problem. The solution necessarily isn't the work, though. Once I know what to do, doesn't mean I'm going to do it. So how do I actually do it? How do I reconcile it? So I've got the Fool, I've got the Nine of Wands, and I've got the Six of Cups. The fool in this case to me is not necessarily reading as the carefree figure of Rider-Waite Smith, and it's not necessarily reading as the bum of the Marseille necessarily. It's reading to me as an exhausted beggar, who's going out and doing the thing. And the interesting thing about this row is that it doesn't give us an easy answer. You know what I mean? Like, so the combination of the Fool and the Nine of Wands here is like, you gotta deal with it. You gotta go out. So the Eight of Wands in this row, which is a nice connection here, told me I was burned out because I was being split in too many directions. But it's not saying I can relax now. It's not saying take a break. It's saying you gotta go out and deal with it. You've gotta actually push through and do more work. You can't stop. Despite the fact that you're burnt out and you're dealing with this shitty situation, you've got to go. There's a line from 30 Rock that I'm thinking of, which is a weird sort of philosophical thing to quote. But Jack, played by Alec Baldwin, at one point tells a story about falling into an ice pit when he was out, hiking in Alaska or somewhere. And he falls into a giant ice pit and he realizes the only way out is to go deeper. He doesn't actually tell you how he got out. But what this says is like, once you see who you are, once your community reflects back what you're doing and you make that commitment to do it, now you've got to go into it. You've got to go deep into the work. You've got to go further into the burnout to really see how it's impacting you, and really do the work inside of healing. And if I think about the image just of the Nine of Wands here, it's almost like you've got to throw more fuel on the fire. This just suddenly looks to me like logs on a fire pit, and we've got these there's a lot of logs, there's a little bit of spark here. So before your fire burns out completely, you got to go and refuel, got to go in and put more logs on the fire. And to do that, you have to figure out what is the right thing to burn. What's the right fuel for your fire? And this is where we get into a little bit of self-care. So here's as I'm reading this for a person, I'm going to say, tell me, what are the things that are going to fuel your fire? How do you put more logs on the fire so that you're dealing with this, you're not making it worse, you're not eating up energy that you don't have, but that you're restoring energy so that your fire can come back, so that you can really reignite what's there. It's not going to be easy. You're tired, you're exhausted, you've got to go into the boiler room and do it. A hint is that it should be something that is both balanced and that feels good. And actually, I'm going to talk about connections, because when I normally do a 9-card reading with one deck, I'm always reading the rows and the columns as well. So I think there are some interesting connections here that I'm going to look at. What feels good? What feels balanced? Where do you restore? How do you emotionally balance yourself? What are the things that do that for you? Now, as a reader, I can't know that, unless you're sitting in front of me. But I can look for clues in the reading, and one of the clues that I have is the way the 6 connects to the 3. And also the way the 8 of Wands and the 9 of Wands are connected in a column on top of the 3 of Cups. So here, this card, again, was a card that signified burnout. This is a card that signifies putting more fuel on the fire. The 3 of Cups signifies community. And so what this says to me, just linking this card, and this row, is I start to say, okay, the reason why you need to go out and ask your friends to reflect this back to you is actually because that connection with your community is the thing that fuels you. And it's possible that this burnout up here has actually stopped you engaging with your friends, with your community. Because if you were still fully engaged with them, it probably wouldn't ask you to go back and engage with that. So the solution here is what balances you and makes you feel good is probably the other Cups cards here, which celebrate, which are your friends and your family. So this seems to have cut you off, despite the fact that you're tired and you don't want to go deeper into here. The thing that you actually need to do is suck up your energy, whatever energy you have left, put a few more logs on the fire and go out and be with the people who you connect with. That's where the source of energy lies. That's where you may feel like you're too tired to go out and do shit, but actually it's in the doing of that that's going to inspire you and balance you. This is telling you not to do that. This is telling you to stay and fight with a thing that can't be fought with. This is saying get out there and soak in some energy from the people around you. That's going to rebalance you. And it may even make this worthwhile. And if nothing else, it's going to give you something to focus on while what's uncontrollable sorts itself out. So the next thing I like to do as I'm doing a reading is just sort of, because when I do a reading out loud, as you can hear, I ramble a lot. There's a lot of mental associations that are happening. I'm making connections. I'm making a connection right now as I look at this row in terms of the solitude of these people. Though the strength figure is holding a lion, again, I'm seeing the lion suddenly as a stone lion on the steps of the library in New York, right? Solitude, solitude, solitude. There's this singleness here that comes out. And there's a singleness here too that sort of is solved in a sense by community, by feeling and feeling good, So one of the things that happens once you get into the flow, of course, is these synapses start firing and you start seeing connections, and you could start using different cartomantic techniques. You could like knight the cards, etc. But the thing that I always feel, again, as a reader, that's really important for me to do is after I've rambled for, in this case, almost 20 minutes about each row, is I need to make sure that the message of the reading comes out. That I'm able to articulate to the person I'm reading for, okay, hopefully what I said here makes sense as you heard me work out the math. Let me just give you the key highlights that I think are important. The first thing is we asked what's subconsciously affecting you in a really negative way that you can't really see or aren't really dealing with. And it's that you're trying to control what's uncontrollable. You're burning yourself out trying to exhibit strength in a situation where you just don't have power. And it's really, really depleting you. The way that you engage with that, the way that you shed light on that, is actually to go out and commit, set a direction to have your friends show back at you who you are now. How have you changed? Have you gone from the life of the party to someone completely apathetic? Have them mirror to you who you are. Once you do that, and once you can see that, then you have to go out and do the work. You have to find a way to put more fuel on the fire. And that's likely, despite the fact that you don't want to be out, that you're tired and exhausted and worn out, that you actually re-engage with that community that this has likely forced you to leave behind. And that you put more fuel on the fire and that you start to balance and that you start to feel good. And the way you're going to do that is reconnecting with your community, with the things that make you feel like you're growing and that make you feel stable. So I summarize it. And then I say, what questions do you have? And if it's a video reading, I usually say, here's some action steps I might give you, etc. But by and large, you go out there and you let them go. One of the reasons why I like written readings is actually I can do all of the work I just did alone. And I usually will type it out. So I'll do all this math on paper. But then I go and I do the summary at the top. So I'll say, hey, so here's each position, here are the cards, here's what the summary of those meanings are, so that as a querent, if you're interested, you just get the answer, which to me is the most important part, right? As a querent, you want the answer. How the reader got there may not be interesting, but you need the answer. You shouldn't be left to pull the answer out of paragraphs of words. But I also like to show my work, like on a math test, so that you can see I didn't just make this up. So I then include all the notes that got me there. In a verbal reading, that's really hard to do. I could sit here and be silent for a long time. And I do try to do that. I try to be silent, but it oftentimes takes just doing the math out loud and then making sure that at the end of the reading, I'm able to say, okay, so I just had a lot of words. Let's pull out the salient points so that you leave here knowing what the answers to the questions are. So anyway, this was a video that went in a bunch of odd directions. I hope it was remotely interesting if you stuck with it this way. So in part, it was the idea of doing a light and shadow reading and how I think of light and shadow. And partly it was a tutorial on how I work with cards and read the cards. Partly a thesis on something I talk about in Tarot on Earth, which is answer the question we were asked and make sure we check ourselves against it. And then partly just a spread and partly just a ramble on shit. So anyway, I just talked myself out. All right, be good. Have a good weekend.